old family picture from 1915 features a mysterious object no one noticed before. Sarah Chen carefully lifted the dusty photo album from her grandmother's attic, the musty smell of decades filling her nostrils. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the small window, she opened to a page she'd seen countless times during childhood visits. There it was, the formal family portrait from 1915, taken in front of the old Victorian house in Salem, Massachusetts. Her great-great-grandfather, Thomas Whitmore, stood proudly in the center, wearing his best Sunday suit. His wife Eleanor held their youngest daughter, while their 3 sons flanked them in matching sailor suits. Sarah had always admired how dignified they looked, how perfectly they represented American family life in the early 1900s. But today, something was different. Perhaps it was the way the light hit the photograph, or maybe the high-resolution scanner she'd borrowed from work. But as Sarah examined the image more closely, her breath caught. There, clutched in the youngest son's hand, was a small object that had never caught anyone's attention before. The item appeared to be an ornate locket or pendant, but its design was unlike anything Sarah had seen from that era. The metalwork was incredibly intricate, featuring symbols that didn't match typical American or European jewelry styles of 1915. Most puzzling was what appeared to be a small gemstone at its center, a deep blue stone that seemed to catch light in an unusual way. "That's strange," she whispered to herself, her voice echoing in the quiet attic. Photography in 1915 was formal and carefully staged. Every object, every person would have been deliberately positioned. This locket wasn't just casually held, it was prominently displayed, as if it were meant to be noticed. Sarah's mind raced. She'd studied this photograph hundreds of times as a child, listening to her grandmother's stories about each family member. Never once had anyone mentioned anything unusual about the picture, and certainly nothing about a mysterious locket. She grabbed her phone and took several photos of the image, zooming in on the mysterious object. The locket appeared to have engravings or symbols around its edge, and the chain it hung from looked substantial, clearly expensive and important. The implications puzzled her. Either this locket had significant meaning to her family that had been forgotten over time, or there was more to this 1915 photograph than anyone had realized. The way the young boy held it suggested it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was something he was meant to display, something important enough to be featured in a formal family portrait. Sarah's first instinct was to call her grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, the family's unofficial historian and keeper of all ancestral stories. At 93, Margaret's memory remained sharp, and she'd inherited most of the family documents and photographs from previous generations. "Grandma Maggie," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady as she held the phone. "I'm going through some old photos in the attic, and I found something interesting in the 1915 family portrait." "Oh, that wonderful picture." Margaret's voice warmed with nostalgia. "Your great-great-grandfather was so proud that day. They just built the new addition to the house, and he wanted to commemorate it." "What did you find, dear?" Sarah hesitated, wondering how to explain her discovery. "The youngest boy, I think that's William, is holding what looks like an ornate locket. It has unusual symbols on it, and the design doesn't look like typical American jewelry from that time." A long silence stretched across the phone line. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice had changed, becoming thoughtful and slightly confused. "A locket? William was holding a locket in the photograph?" "Yes, it's quite prominent. He's displaying it almost deliberately." "You've never noticed it before?" Margaret paused again. "Sarah, honey, I've looked at that photograph thousands of times over the years. I helped catalog all the family photos when I inherited them. I don't recall any locket." Sarah felt a chill. How could something so obvious have gone unnoticed for over a century? "Could you bring that photograph to me?" Margaret continued. "I have some of William's personal effects that my father saved. Maybe there's a connection I never made before." As she drove through the familiar streets of Salem, Sarah's mind buzzed with questions. How had such a prominent object in a family photograph remained unnoticed for so long? And what could the unusual symbols on the locket possibly mean? Salem's historic district looked exactly as it always had, with its colonial architecture and tourist-friendly witch trial monuments. But today, everything felt different, as if she was seeing her hometown through new eyes, eyes that had glimpsed something that had been hiding in plain sight for over a century. The mystery of the locket was just beginning, and Sarah had the strange feeling that this discovery would lead her family into uncharted territory of their own history. Margaret Whitmore's living room felt smaller than usual as Sarah spread the 1915 photograph across the coffee table. Her grandmother moved slowly from her favorite armchair, her weathered hands reaching for the magnifying glass she kept nearby for reading. "My goodness," Margaret whispered as she examined the image closely. "There it is, clear as day. How did we all miss this for so many years?" Sarah watched her grandmother's expression change from confusion to recognition, to something that looked almost like fear. "Margaret, what is it?" Her grandmother set down the magnifying glass and walked to an old mahogany secretary desk in the corner of the room. From a locked drawer, she withdrew a small wooden box that Sarah had never seen before. "After you called yesterday, I spent the evening going through William's effects. My father saved everything when William died in the influenza pandemic of 1918. I found something that I think might be connected." Margaret opened the box carefully, revealing a collection of items: old letters, a pocket watch, some coins, and wrapped in faded blue velvet, an ornate locket that matched exactly what they could see in the 1915 photograph. Sarah's heart pounded as she reached for the locket. It was heavier than she'd expected, and the metalwork was even more intricate up close. The symbols around the edge were definitely not European or American in origin. They looked almost Asian, but not quite Chinese or Japanese. "There's more," Margaret said, pulling out a letter written in faded ink. "This was tucked inside the locket when I found it." The letter was brief, written in a careful hand. "William, this locket belonged to your great-grandmother's family before they came to America. The symbols are protective, meant to keep our family safe through difficult times. Your father insisted it be visible in our family portrait so that future generations would know of its importance. Keep it safe, as it has kept us safe. Your loving mother, Eleanor Whitmore, 1916. Sarah stared at the letter, then at the locket, then back at the photograph. "So this locket has been in our family for generations, but somehow its history was lost?" Margaret nodded slowly. "It appears so. Eleanor died just 2 years after writing this letter, during the influenza pandemic that also claimed William. My grandfather Thomas was so devastated by losing his wife and youngest son that he packed away many of their personal belongings and never spoke of them again." Sarah opened the locket carefully. Inside was a small compartment that contained what appeared to be a tiny scroll of paper, yellowed with age. Unrolling it revealed more of the mysterious symbols, drawn in precise, delicate strokes. "Grandma, do you know anything about our family's ancestry before they came to Salem? You mentioned a great-grandmother's family." Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. "There are some records, but they're fragmentary. I know that Eleanor's grandmother came to America in the 1840s, but the family was always secretive about exactly where they came from and why they left." The next morning found Sarah at the New England Historic Genealogical Society in Boston, armed with copies of the photograph, the letter from Eleanor, and detailed images of the mysterious symbols on the locket. The Society's research library was renowned for helping people trace their American ancestry back to its origins. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a genealogist specializing in 19th century immigration, examined Sarah's materials with professional interest. A woman in her 40s with dark hair, pulled back, and wire-rimmed glasses, she had helped hundreds of families uncover their historical roots. "The symbols are fascinating," Dr. Martinez said, studying the photographs through a high-powered magnifying glass. "They're definitely not European. The style suggests Southeast Asian origin, possibly Vietnamese or Cambodian, though some elements remind me of symbols I've seen in Laotian artifacts." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. "Southeast Asian? But this is from the 1840s. Were there many Southeast Asian immigrants to America that early?" "Very few, which makes this even more interesting," Dr. Martinez replied. "Most Asian immigration to America in the mid-1800s was Chinese, with some Japanese later in the century. Southeast Asian immigration didn't really begin until much later, after the Vietnam War." Dr. Martinez turned to her computer and began searching through immigration databases. "What was the name of Eleanor's grandmother?" Sarah consulted her notes. "All I have is that her name was Catherine, and she arrived sometime in the 1840s. The family records are very incomplete." After an hour of searching, Dr. Martinez found something intriguing. "Here's a Catherine Chen who arrived in Boston in 1847, aboard the merchant ship Pacific Star. The passenger manifest lists her as coming from French Indochina, which would have included Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia at that time." Sarah's heart raced. Chen, that was her own surname, inherited through marriage. Could this be more than coincidence? The manifest also notes that she was accompanied by a French missionary named Father Auguste Dubois, who was returning from missionary work in Southeast Asia. That might explain how she was able to make the journey. Missionary societies sometimes helped refugees or converts emigrate. Dr. Martinez pulled up more records. Catherine Chen married a Thomas Whitmore in Salem in 1849. She would have been Eleanor's grandmother, which means the locket and its symbols represent a direct connection to your family's Southeast Asian heritage. Sarah stared at the computer screen, pieces of her family puzzle beginning to fall into place. But why would they have hidden this connection? Why was it forgotten? Anti-Asian sentiment was very strong in 19th century America, Dr. Martinez explained. Even before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, Asian immigrants faced significant discrimination. A family might well choose to downplay or hide their Asian heritage to avoid prejudice. The locket suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a secret keeper of family history, a connection to ancestors and culture that had been deliberately obscured for protection, then accidentally forgotten as generations passed. With her newfound knowledge about her family's Southeast Asian connections, Sarah contacted Dr. Lin Nguyen, a professor of Southeast Asian Studies at Harvard University. Dr. Nguyen specialized in Vietnamese and Cambodian cultural artifacts and had published extensively on the role of protective amulets in Southeast Asian traditions. Dr. Nguyen's office was filled with beautiful artifacts, textiles, and books about Southeast Asian culture. When Sarah showed her the photographs of the locket and its symbols, the professor's eyes immediately lit up with recognition. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Nguyen said, adjusting her glasses to examine the images more closely. "These symbols are from a very specific tradition. They're protective inscriptions used by families in what is now central Vietnam during the 19th century. She pointed to different elements of the design. "This symbol here represents family continuity across generations. This one is for protection during travel, very appropriate for a family preparing to emigrate. And this central design with the blue stone is particularly significant." "What does it mean?" Sarah asked eagerly. "It's called a family soul stone," Dr. Nguyen explained. In Vietnamese tradition, certain families believed that their ancestral spirits resided in special stones that were passed down through generations. The blue color suggests it might be a sapphire or similar gemstone that was considered sacred to the family. Dr. Nguyen pulled out several reference books, showing Sarah similar designs and explaining their cultural context. "What's remarkable is that your ancestor Catherine managed to preserve this tradition even after emigrating to America. Usually these cultural practices were abandoned when families tried to assimilate." "The letter from Eleanor suggested it was meant to keep the family safe," Sarah mentioned. "Exactly. These amulets were believed to provide protection, but also to maintain connection with ancestral wisdom and family identity. By including it prominently in the 1915 photograph, Eleanor was ensuring that future generations would have visual proof of their heritage, even if the oral traditions were lost." Dr. Nguyen paused thoughtfully. "There's something else you should know. During the 1840s, when your ancestor emigrated, central Vietnam was experiencing significant political upheaval. French colonization was disrupting traditional communities, and many families were forced to flee. Catherine's emigration was likely not voluntary. She was probably a refugee." This revelation added another layer to Sarah's understanding. The locket wasn't just a family heirloom. It was a refugee's treasure, carried by a woman forced to leave everything behind except the most essential connection to her identity and ancestors. "Professor Nguyen, is there any way to translate the symbols inside the locket? The ones on the small scroll?" Dr. Nguyen nodded enthusiastically. "I'd be happy to help with that. From what I can see in your photographs, those appear to be family names and protective blessings written in classical Vietnamese script. If you could bring the actual locket to me, I could provide a complete translation." Sarah returned to Dr. Nguyen's office the following week, carrying the precious locket in a protective case. Her grandmother had insisted she take every precaution with the family heirloom, now that they understood its true significance. Dr. Nguyen examined the actual symbols with intense concentration, occasionally consulting reference books and making notes in Vietnamese. The process took nearly 2 hours, but gradually the mystery began to unfold. "The inscriptions tell a remarkable story," Dr. Nguyen finally announced. "They include the family name, Chen, but also an older Vietnamese family name, Nguyen Thi Kim, which suggests Catherine came from a well-established family." She pointed to different sections of the tiny scroll. "This part is a genealogical record. listing the names of ancestors going back 5 generations. And this section contains protective blessings for safe travel and prosperity in a new land. But the most significant part, Dr. Nguyen continued, her voice growing excited, is this final section. It's a message specifically for future generations. Let me translate it for you. She wrote out the translation in careful English. To our children's children who will read this in a distant land, remember that you carry the wisdom of generations in your blood. Though we cannot follow you across the ocean, our love and protection travel with this stone. When times are difficult, hold this close and remember that you are never alone. The blue stone connects you to the spirits of your ancestors and to the homeland that lives forever in your heart. Written by Nguyen Thi Kim Chen in the year of the metal sheep, before the great journey. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Here was a direct message from her great-great-great-grandmother, written over 175 years ago, specifically intended for descendants like herself who would live in America but might want to understand their origins. Dr. Nguyen, what year would the year of the metal sheep have been? 1847, the professor replied immediately. That matches perfectly with the immigration records you found. Catherine, or Nguyen Thi Kim Chen, wrote this message just before leaving Vietnam. Dr. Nguyen continued examining the locket's other inscriptions. There's also what appears to be a map reference and the name of a village in central Vietnam. If that village still exists, you might be able to trace your family's exact origins. Sarah carefully photographed Dr. Nguyen's translation and made detailed notes about everything they had discovered. The locket had revealed far more than just family history. It had provided a direct emotional connection to an ancestor who had faced unimaginable challenges, but had the foresight to preserve her family's legacy for future generations. Professor, do you think there might be other families with similar stories? Other Southeast Asian refugees who managed to preserve their cultural heritage in secret? Dr. Nguyen nodded thoughtfully. Almost certainly. Immigration records from that period are incomplete, and many families deliberately obscured their origins to avoid discrimination. Your discovery could help other families uncover their own hidden histories. Armed with the village name and family information from the locket's inscriptions, Sarah contacted the Vietnamese American Community Center in Boston. The center maintained connections with genealogical researchers in Vietnam, who helped Vietnamese Americans trace their family roots. Mai Tran, the center's cultural coordinator, was fascinated by Sarah's story and agreed to help contact researchers in Vietnam. Within a week, she had connected Sarah with Dr. Pham Van Duc, a historian at Hue University who specialized in 19th century Vietnamese genealogy. Their first video call was emotional and revealing. Dr. Pham, speaking excellent English, confirmed that the village mentioned in the locket's inscriptions still existed, though it was now part of a larger municipality in central Vietnam. The Nguyen Thi Kim family was well documented in our regional records, Dr. Pham explained, consulting historical documents on his desk. They were silk merchants who owned substantial land before the French colonial period. However, their property was confiscated in 1846 when they refused to convert to Christianity and submit to French authority. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. This explained why Catherine had been forced to emigrate. She was a political refugee fleeing religious persecution. We have records showing that Kim's daughter, who would have been Catherine, disappeared in 1847. Family oral history suggested she escaped to America with the help of sympathetic French missionaries, but we never had confirmation until now. Dr. Pham shared photographs of historical documents, including a family register that listed Catherine's original Vietnamese name and birth date. Even more remarkably, he had located elderly villagers who still remembered family stories about the merchant's daughter who sailed across the ocean. There's something else, Dr. Pham added, his voice growing excited. Catherine's younger brother remained in Vietnam and continued the family line. You have living relatives here. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Living relatives? In Vietnam? Yes, Catherine's brother's great-great-grandson still lives in the area. His name is Nguyen Van Minh, and he's a retired schoolteacher who has spent years researching his family history. He never knew what happened to his great-great-aunt Catherine. Dr. Pham arranged a video call between Sarah and Nguyen Van Minh for the following week. The prospect of connecting with a Vietnamese relative, someone who shared her ancestor Catherine's blood, felt surreal and wonderful. When the call took place, despite the language barrier, Mr. Minh spoke limited English and Sarah spoke no Vietnamese. The emotional connection was immediate. Through Dr. Pham's translation, Mr. Min shared family stories that had been passed down through generations, including tales of Catherine's intelligence, courage, and the family's sorrow when she had to flee Vietnam. He says the family has always wondered what happened to Catherine and whether she survived the journey to America. Dr. Pham translated, learning that she not only survived but established a successful family line brings great joy to them. Mr. Min also revealed that the family in Vietnam had preserved other artifacts from Catherine's era, including documents and jewelry that matched the style of Sarah's locket. The connection with her Vietnamese relatives opened up an entirely new understanding of Sarah's family history. Through continued correspondence with Nguyen Van Minh and Dr. E. Pham, she learned details about Catherine's life before emigration that explained many mysteries about the locket and the family's subsequent behavior in America. Catherine's family had been prominent silk merchants in central Vietnam, known for their independence and resistance to French colonial pressure. When the French began forcing conversions to Christianity and seizing property from non-compliant families, the Nguyen Thi Kim family faced an impossible choice: submit to colonial authority or lose everything. Catherine, at 19, was chosen to carry the family's most precious possessions to safety, including the ancestral locket and enough resources to establish the family line in a new country. Her escape was facilitated by Father Auguste Dubois, a French missionary who disagreed with the harsh colonial policies and secretly helped several Vietnamese families emigrate. Understanding this context explains so much, Sarah shared with her grandmother during one of their weekly conversations. Catherine wasn't just an immigrant seeking opportunity, she was preserving her family's entire cultural legacy. Margaret nodded, looking at the locket with new reverence. And that explains why Eleanor was so insistent about including it in the family photograph. She must have known some of Catherine's story. Through Mr. Min, Sarah learned about Vietnamese cultural traditions that had unconsciously survived in her American family. The Whitmore family's emphasis on education, their tradition of extended family gatherings, and even their practice of honoring ancestors through photographs all reflected Vietnamese cultural values that Catherine had subtly maintained. "Your great-great-grandmother was remarkable," Dr. Pham explained during one of their video calls. She managed to preserve her cultural identity while successfully assimilating into American society. The locket was her way of ensuring that future generations would have the option to reclaim their heritage. Sarah also discovered that the blue stone in the locket was indeed a sapphire, mined from the mountains of central Vietnam and considered sacred by Catherine's family. According to Mr. Min, similar stones were still treasured by their Vietnamese relatives. Perhaps most moving was learning that Catherine had maintained some contact with her family in Vietnam through letters sent via missionary networks. These letters, preserved in Vietnam, documented her early years in America, her marriage to Thomas Whitmore, and her determination to honor both her Vietnamese heritage and her new American identity. She wrote that America gave her freedom and opportunity. Dr. Pham translated from one of Catherine's letters, but Vietnam gave her soul and identity. She hoped her descendants would someday understand the value of both gifts. The letters also revealed that Catherine had taught her children some Vietnamese customs and language. But these traditions had gradually faded as the family worked to establish themselves in Salem's predominantly Anglo-Protestant community. Sarah decided to document her family's remarkable story and share it with the broader community. She contacted the Salem Historical Society, the same organization where she had researched other family histories, and proposed creating an exhibit about hidden immigrant histories in Salem. Dr. James Harrison, the Society's chief archivist, was immediately interested. "Your story represents something we've long suspected but rarely been able to document," he explained. Many immigrant families in the 19th century deliberately obscured their origins to avoid discrimination, but that means their actual stories were lost to history. Working with the Historical Society, Sarah organized an exhibit called Hidden Heritage: The Secret Stories in Salem Families. The centerpiece was her own family's story, featuring the 1915 photograph, the locket, translations of the Vietnamese inscriptions, and connections to their living relatives in Vietnam. The exhibit opening drew an unexpectedly large crowd, including many Salem families who had their own questions about mysterious family heirlooms, unexplained cultural traditions, or gaps in their genealogical records. Your discovery has given permission for other families to investigate their own hidden histories, Dr. Harrison observed as they watched visitors examining the display cases. Indeed, several families approached Sarah that evening with their own mysteries. The Kowalski family had a curious wooden box with symbols they'd never been able to identify. The Martinez family had an old painting that seemed to depict a landscape from somewhere other than New England. The O'Brien family had inherited a collection of books in a language none of them could read. Sarah realized that her investigation had uncovered something larger than just her own family's story. It had revealed how many American families carried hidden histories that had been deliberately obscured by previous generations, trying to protect their descendants from discrimination. She also arranged for Mr. Min to participate in the exhibit via video call, allowing Salem visitors to meet her Vietnamese relative and hear about the family's history from the Vietnamese perspective. The cultural exchange was emotional and enlightening for everyone involved. This locket, Sarah told the crowd during her presentation, was more than just jewelry. It was a time capsule, a message of love across generations, and proof that our American family stories are often more complex and beautiful than we realize. The local newspaper covered the story, leading to interest from genealogical societies throughout New England, and even inquiries from Vietnamese American communities in other states who were inspired to investigate their own family mysteries. 6 months after discovering the mysterious locket in the 1915 photograph, Sarah's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. What began as curiosity about an overlooked detail in a family portrait had evolved into a deep connection with her Vietnamese heritage and a new understanding of her place in both American and Vietnamese family histories. The locket now sits in a place of honor in Sarah's home, displayed alongside photographs of both her American and Vietnamese relatives. She had learned enough Vietnamese to conduct simple conversations with Mr. Min, and they maintained regular contact, sharing family updates and cultural traditions across the Pacific. Margaret, now 94 but invigorated by the discoveries about their family, had become something of a local celebrity as the keeper of Catherine's story. "I never imagined I'd live to see our family's true history revealed," she told Sarah during one of their weekly visits. "Catherine would be so proud to know that her message finally reached us." Sarah had also connected with other Vietnamese American families who were investigating their own genealogies, creating a support network for people uncovering hidden Asian heritage in their family histories. The Salem Historical Society's Hidden Heritage exhibit had become permanent, inspiring similar projects in other New England communities. Perhaps most remarkably, Sarah was planning a trip to Vietnam to visit Mr. Min and see the village where Catherine had been born. The trip would complete a circle that began when Catherine fled Vietnam in 1847, carrying her family's heritage in a small locket across an ocean to preserve it for future generations. The 1915 photograph was never just about that moment in time, Sarah reflected as she examined the image that had started everything. It was Eleanor's way of ensuring that Catherine's sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten, that someday we would rediscover our complete family story. The locket had revealed that identity isn't just about where you're born or where you live. It's about understanding the full complexity of your heritage and honoring the courage of ancestors who preserved that heritage through impossible circumstances. As Sarah prepared for her journey to Vietnam, she carried with her copies of all the family documents, photographs of her American relatives, and most importantly, Catherine's locket, finally returning home after 175 years, carried by a descendant who understood its true value. The mystery in the 1915 photograph had been solved, but it had opened doors to a much larger story about family, identity, cultural preservation, and the lengths people will go to ensure their children's children remember where they came from. Sometimes the most important discoveries are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment and the right person to notice what everyone else has missed.